Hello, or Privyet, as they say in my country of Russia. I am Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, but many of you may recognize me by my surname, which is Pavlov. I am most commonly associated with the psychology theory of conditioning, but I wasn't always interested in that. Actually, I was more interested in physiology and chemistry. However, when I grew up, as growing up, I studied for the priesthood, just as my father had. But when I realized that that wasn't my passion or my interest, I switched to medicine in 1870 and attended the Military Medical Academy in St. Petersburg. In 1879, I received my degree in natural science, and in 1883, I received my MD. Shortly after that, in about the 1900s, I really began to focus on studying reflexes, especially the salivary response. So the work that actually made me a household name in psychology began as a study in digestion. So I wasn't seeking to learn about conditioning. I was really seeking just to learn more about digestion. I was looking at the digestive process in dogs, especially the interaction between salivation and the action of the stomach. I realized they were closely linked by the reflexes in the autonomic nervous system. Without salivation, the stomach didn't get the message to start digesting. I wanted to see if there was an external stimuli that could affect this process. So what I did was I used my dogs and I rang a bell every time I served them food. So every time that they saw food or were eating, I would ring a bell so that they would associate food with the bell. Eventually, I would I found that if I rang the bell, they would just automatically salivate with no food being present or without them seeing food. So actually in 1903, I published my results calling them a conditioned reflex, which is very different. Well, it's not very different, but it's different from reflexology, which my competitor Vladimir studies. So this learning process that I kind of stumbled upon, in which the dog's nervous system comes to associate the sound of a bell with the food, is called conditioning.
Hello, I am Russian behaviorist Vladimir Bechterev. I am a physiologist, psychologist, neurologist, and psychiatrist. In 1847, I graduated from the Military Academy in St. Petersburg. By the age of 24, I traveled to Berlin to study with Du Bois and Wundt. In 1855, I established a psychology lab in Russia, and it was located at the University of Kazan. It was the first. I was also a founding member of the Psychoneurological Institute. In 1851, I earned my doctoral degree in medicine by focusing on the physical connection between the physical state of man and his mental state. This led me to my study of reflexology. In my paper, Objective Psychology, I stated that all mental processes were accompanied by reflexes. These reflexes could be observed and analyzed. Pavlov, I believe you called this term conditioned reflexes? Anywho, I believe that we could study an organism's responses to external or internal stimuli through this method. Along with this, I also support research that states certain functions could be traced back to specific regions in the brain. I do agree with Pavlov and many others that psychology should be purely objective. I believe all behavior can be explained objectively by studying the reflexes or observable traits. I do, however, disagree with Pavlov's terminology conditioned reflexes. Instead, I call them association reflexes. I do not believe these mental processes have been conditioned at all. Instead, the brain causes these reflexes. That is why they are called reflexes, after all. Reflexes should generally require no conditioning, but the ability to form mental processes. I came to this conclusion in my lab while studying motor reflexes. While experimenting on humans and small animals, I used slight shocks and discovered that participants eventually made an association to their source of pain. The shocks also resulted in a withdrawal reaction, meaning they avoided the stimulus. Although Pavlov's and my theories are quite similar, Watson discovered Pavlov first, thus making him a household name. I met my death on December 24th, 1927. There's a bit of controversy surrounding the cause. Some say it was a bit odd I died after diagnosing Stalin with paranoia. Furthermore, Stalin had my name and works erased from textbooks, but that is for a different day.
Contrary to popular belief, Vladimir and I both studied reflexes for a very long time. However, what I call conditioned reflexes, Vladimir calls association reflexes. Yes, in my experiment, I used a bell as a neutral stimulus. Whenever I gave food to the dogs, I also rang a bell. After a number of repeats of this procedure, I tried the bell on its own, and as you might expect, the bell on its own now caused an increase in salivation. So, the dog had learned an association between the bell and the food, and a new behavior had been learned. Because this response was learned, or conditioned as I would say, it's called a conditioned response. The neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus. I found that for associations to be made, the two stimuli had to be presented close together in time, and I call this the law of temporal contiguity. All in all, I've done my best to be cordial with you, Vladimir, but you've made your disgust for me apparent in your 1928 book when you heavily criticized my saliva method, nearly every time you mention my name. However, I believe you're just merely envious that John Watson discovered me first and thus used the term I coined conditioned reflexes, and as a result made me a household name.